For decades, the world has operated as a giant interconnected marketplace, where the movement of goods and services links distant nations together in a web of commerce. Countries buy and sell goods to one another every day, exchanging everything from raw materials to finished products, creating a constant flow of trade across borders. This system allows nations to specialize in what they do best. One country might excel at making cars, while another focuses on producing electronics. By trading, both can access a wider variety of goods and services, and both benefit from the exchange. International trade has fueled economic growth, created millions of jobs, and lowered prices for consumers around the world. It's helped lift entire populations out of poverty and made products more affordable and accessible. But this global system depends on trust, cooperation, and predictability. Without these, the gears of trade can grind to a halt. Businesses invest billions in complex supply chains that span continents, confident that the rules and agreements governing trade won't change overnight. This stability allows companies to plan for the future and make long-term investments. Consider a single smartphone. It might have a screen from South Korea, a processor from the United States, and batteries from China, all assembled in yet another country before reaching your hands. Stability is the bedrock of global commerce, ensuring goods flow smoothly across borders. But when tariffs are introduced, this flow is disrupted and uncertainty spreads. A tariff is essentially a tax on imported goods, making foreign products more expensive and, in theory, encouraging people to buy domestic alternatives. But the effects ripple far beyond store shelves. Tariffs are a double-edged sword. They can raise costs for local manufacturers who rely on imported parts, and often spark retaliation from other countries, leading to costly trade wars that hurt everyone involved. For years, the United States championed free trade, lowering barriers and expanding markets for American goods and services, helping to shape the modern global economy. But the Trump administration argued that existing deals were unfair to American workers and industries, and imposed significant tariffs on key trading partners, aiming to rebalance the scales. This marked a dramatic shift in U.S. trade policy, sending shockwaves through the global economy and leaving businesses scrambling to adapt. Companies and countries were forced to rethink relationships and strategies that had been built up over decades as new barriers and uncertainties emerged. The rules of the game had changed, and the world's marketplace was suddenly less predictable, with some businesses struggling to survive in the new environment. The stage was set for a major realignment in global trade, as nations and companies searched for new ways to navigate an uncertain future. 7 key U.S. partners, Germany, Japan, South Korea, India, Mexico, the UK, and Italy, were hit hard by these tariffs, sending shockwaves through the global economy and straining long-standing relationships. These aren't minor players, they're industrial powerhouses and some of America's closest allies, each with a unique role in the world's supply chains and economic growth. German car makers, Japanese and South Korean electronics giants, and Mexican manufacturers all built deep economic ties with the U.S., creating thousands of jobs on both sides of the border, and fueling innovation through collaboration. Supply chains were tightly integrated. A car assembled in Kentucky might use an engine from Japan and a transmission from the U.S., with parts and expertise flowing seamlessly across borders. Mexico's partnership with the U.S. under NAFTA made cross-border production seamless and efficient, allowing companies to optimize costs and deliver products faster to consumers. India, the UK, and Italy contributed in pharmaceuticals, aerospace, and fashion, all vital to U.S. industry, providing not just goods but also research, design, and specialized skills. These nations weren't just customers, they were essential partners, helping American manufacturing thrive through shared technology, investment, and expertise. They supplied critical components, invested in U.S. communities, and built plants that hired local workers, strengthening the American economy from the ground up. The trade relationship was a carefully constructed two-way street, built on trust, mutual benefit, and decades of cooperation. When the U.S. imposed tariffs, it disrupted a system American industry itself depended on, putting jobs, investments, and future growth at risk. In 2018, the Trump administration announced sweeping tariffs on steel and aluminum, 25% and 10% respectively, sending shockwaves through global markets and hitting some of America's closest allies especially hard. These measures were sudden, and their impact was felt almost overnight. The official justification was national security, But for the 7 affected nations, it felt more like an economic ambush than a protective measure. Long-standing partnerships were suddenly under strain. Practically overnight, the cost of doing business in the US soared for manufacturers and importers alike. Companies that relied on these metals faced immediate financial pressure. Businesses were forced into tough decisions. Should they absorb the higher costs, pass them on to customers by raising prices, or search for loopholes and alternative suppliers to survive? This climate of uncertainty made the US a riskier and less attractive place for both domestic and foreign investment. Investors hesitated, unsure of what policy might come next. The tariffs didn't just affect raw materials, they sparked a tit-for-tat trade war, as other countries retaliated with their own tariffs on American goods, escalating tensions further. Global supply chains, carefully built over decades, were suddenly thrown into disarray. Companies scrambled to reroute shipments and find new partners. The once stable trading environment vanished, replaced by unpredictability, economic hostility, and a sense of looming risk that made planning for the future nearly impossible. The US was no longer the obvious or automatic choice for global investment. Other countries began to look elsewhere for opportunity and stability. The ever-present risk of sudden new taxes or tariffs made long-term business planning a gamble, forcing companies to reconsider their strategies. As a result, these countries started searching for a new, more reliable partner, one that could offer stability and predictability in a turbulent world. The world's economic center of gravity was beginning to shift, with Canada emerging as a promising new hub for international business and investment. As the US built trade walls, Canada opened its doors. Canada signed major free trade deals with Europe and Asia, giving it tariff-free access to huge markets. For companies from Germany, Japan, or Italy, Canada became a stable hub for manufacturing and export. Businesses could invest in Canada, serve the Canadian market, and export tariff-free to Europe and Asia. Canada offered what the US no longer did: certainty and access. With a skilled workforce, strong infrastructure, and proximity to the US market, Canada was an attractive alternative. The Canadian government actively courted foreign investment, offering incentives and promoting its stability. For the 7 nations, Canada's message was clear: we're open for business. The result was a surge of interest in Canada as a new North American base. The shift wasn't just talk. Companies started moving investments from the US to Canada. Japanese and German automakers paused US expansions and upgraded Canadian plants instead. An Italian steel company, once planning a US facility, built in Ontario to avoid tariff chaos. Mexico's food giants expanded Canadian operations to serve both North America and Asia. Jobs in food processing, logistics, and manufacturing that might have gone to US states landed in Canadian provinces. Even small and medium businesses followed suit. A South Korean electronics supplier opened a new center in British Columbia. Each move meant lost jobs and investment for the US. The migration was steady and widespread, affecting entire supply chains. Canada's stable trade environment became a magnet for global industry. The US watched as opportunities quietly slipped north. The consequences were felt on factory floors across America. The direct result was a decline in US manufacturing jobs and output. The very workers tariffs aimed to protect were often the ones hurt most. Cancelled factory expansions meant promised jobs never materialized. Existing US factories, reliant on imported parts, saw costs rise and competitiveness fall. Some had to lay off workers, cut shifts, or shut down entirely. The silence of closed factories became a symbol of decline. Studies showed that while a few jobs were created in protected industries, far more were lost elsewhere. The manufacturing heartland, meant to be revived, faced plant closures and layoffs. The pain rippled through communities. Diners lost customers, trucking firms lost business, suppliers lost clients. The economic blow hollowed out towns built around a single employer. Instead of revival, many places saw accelerated decline. The promise of protection turned into a harsh new reality. Before tariffs, the US was North America's investment magnet, with global supply chains humming and jobs growing. International companies regularly announced new US projects, leveraging strengths across borders. The system was built on trust, collaboration, and efficiency. After tariffs, the US became seen as unpredictable and risky. Investment slowed, and headlines shifted from new US factories to new Canadian ones. Supply chains broke down, clogged by new taxes and retaliation. Companies focused on self-preservation, not partnership. Canada's manufacturing sector boomed while the US struggled. Canadian exports to Europe and Asia grew, while US goods faced new barriers. The lesson was clear: disrupting trade relationships had real, lasting consequences. The economic map of North America was redrawn, favoring America's northern neighbor. Beyond the numbers, the human cost was profound. The promise of tariffs was a return to good factory jobs, but for many it meant layoffs and uncertainty. In places like Ohio and Pennsylvania, the impact was personal: pink slips, shuttered factories, and tough choices for families. Communities built on manufacturing lost not just jobs, but their identity. Skilled workers found their experience hard to transfer to new industries. Retraining programs often fell short of replacing stable, well-paying jobs. The global economy moved on, with new supply chains and partnerships. Rebuilding lost trust will take years. American workers now face fewer opportunities and more competition. Their future depends on how the country adapts to a changed world. The challenge is to find a new way to compete. The stakes for American workers have never been higher. The story of 7 key US partners shifting to Canada is a lesson in the unintended consequences of protectionism. Tariffs meant to revive American industry instead pushed investment north. The result? A hollowing out of sectors the tariffs aimed to help. Factories saw costs rise and futures darken. The US now stands at a crossroads with supply chains rerouted and trust broken. American workers face a more precarious future. The path forward requires learning from this experience. America must invest in skills, innovation, and smart trade policies. In a connected world, prosperity comes from partnership, not isolation. The future depends on building trust and opening doors, not closing them.